Hello, everyone, and welcome to our FIP webinar. Today, we welcome you, whether you're live with us or you are watching the recording of this event. Welcome to our global view of pharmacist needs in humanitarian settings. This webinar fits under the FIP humanitarian program, and we are happy to share with you during this event some experiences from around the globe about the role of pharmacists in humanitarian settings. Let us start first by some announcements. This webinar is being recorded and live streamed via YouTube. The recording will be available on our website at www.events.fip.org. You may ask questions using the question box provided. So please, whatever question you have in mind or any comment that you want to do, please use the question box and provide your question. You are welcome to provide feedback at webinars@fip.org. And of course, we encourage you, if you're still not a member at FIP, become a member of FIP by going to our website, www.fip.org, and going to the membership, and then register as an FIP member. We are happy to moderate Rúben and myself this event. We'll be having also Nour from FIP to discuss some work we're doing at FIP. We are delighted to have our CEO, Catherine Duggan, with us for the final comments. We have also Vice President Prosper Haig. We have Ali and Romy and Tasneem, who would be introduced and will be talking about their biography when their parts will be coming. So let's go to the next slide. I am Marwan Akel. I'm a project manager, workforce development, evidence and impact at FIP, and I am the editor of the Pharmacy Education Journal. I am happy to co-moderate this event with my colleague, Rúben Viegas, who is the Practice Development and Transformation Projects Coordinator. Our learning objectives for today's event are to understand the FIP humanitarian framework that was launched in 2021. So we're having a small refresher about this humanitarian framework, knowing the importance of the framework and its use around the globe in these situations, to discuss the needs for pharmacists in humanitarian arena, and to identify needs for interventions delivered by pharmacists in the humanitarian and preparedness aspects. So we'll be having experiences from around the globe where our esteemed speakers will be sharing with us so that we share this experience and learn from each other. Today's program was started by the introduction, then we'll go to humanitarian work of that FIP is doing. We will be also having the sharing experiences from 3 different speakers. We'll be having the experience from Lebanon, we'll be having the experience from Ukraine, and the experience from Turkey, knowing that all these 3 countries are passing through crisis at the right moment. We'll also have the reflections from the African region by Prosper Haig. Then we'll go to question and answer, and we'll be collecting all your questions and trying to provide answers to you. And we will finish our event by final words and comments from our CEO, Catherine Duggan. Next slide, please. I will start by introducing our colleague, Nour ElTahla. Nour is a project coordinator for equity, sustainability, policy, and development. Nour will be presenting the FIP's humanitarian work and will be emphasizing on the humanitarian global competency. Nour, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marwan. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So as Marwan mentioned, I'd like to share a very quick overview of some of FIP's work in the field of the humanitarian program. Next slide, please. So this, what you see on screen is the FIP microsite, or the mini website for all of FIP's work on the humanitarian program. The microsite is a useful tool that allows you to see the ways that FIP can provide support to pharmacists and pharmacy teams in crises. And on this microsite, you can find FIP's activities linked to the humanitarian program, our partners and collaborations, as well as several important FIP resources and publications. You can access the microsite using the link on the screen, which is humanitarian.fip.org. Next slide, please. One of the important FIP publications is the FIP Global Humanitarian Competency Framework that was launched in 2021. And the aim of this framework is to provide a set of competency standards for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians who are involved in humanitarian aid and disaster relief efforts. This framework was developed by FIP in collaboration with various stakeholders, including pharmacists, humanitarian organizations, and government agencies. So this framework, as you can see on screen, consists of a set of competencies that are grouped into 4 main domains. The first one is the pharmaceutical public health domain, which includes competencies related to understanding and addressing public health issues in humanitarian contexts, such as disease surveillance and response, health promotion, and health system strengthening. The second domain is pharmaceutical care, which includes competencies related to providing patient-centered care in humanitarian contexts, such as conducting medication histories, providing drug information, and managing medication therapy. The third domain is organization and management, which includes competencies related to effectively managing pharmacy operations and resources in humanitarian contexts, such as inventory management, logistics, and budgeting. And last but not least, the professional and personal domain, which includes competencies related to personal and professional development, such as self-awareness, cultural competence, and leadership. The competencies within each domain reflect the unique challenges and responsibilities faced by pharmacists and healthcare professionals working in these contexts, and they aim to provide to improve the quality and effectiveness of pharmaceutical services provided in humanitarian settings, and to enhance the role of pharmacists and pharmacy technicians in disaster relief efforts worldwide. So this framework is available in English and in Turkish, and will soon be available in Arabic. And we're working with our member organizations to have it translated in as many languages as possible to make it accessible and useful for everyone. You can find this resource again on our microsite, humanitarian.fip.org, where you can read more about this framework. Thank you very much, and over to you, Rúben.
Thank you so much, Nour. It's never too much to reinforce the importance of this work and the humanitarian aspect. Not only because the recent COVID-19 pandemic just highlighted how pharmacists are important in these situations, but because we had many disasters and emergency situations in the past, but we will for sure have them in the future. So we need our colleagues to be ready and to be involved and to be available to work in these situations. So these resources are important so that our colleagues can start and get involved in this area of work if they wish so, of course. Without further ado, we just move to the next experiences that we are here from. It's important to understand what's happening in these settings, in these situations, and no one else better to explain us than the people that are there and that have the experience of going through these disaster and emergency situations. So the first experience is from Dr. Ronnie Zini, is the Director, Department of Pharmacy on the American University of Beirut Medical Center, Inspect LB. So Ronnie, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the presentation opportunity. I'm so privileged and honored to be here today to present eventually a pharmacy in crisis insights from Lebanon's experience. So eventually, to start with the presentation, I have nothing to disclose. So eventually, at this end of this presentation, the audience should be able to list the challenges of the Lebanese healthcare system, summarize the etiologies of the crisis, outline the unveiled opportunities after all of what happened. So we're going to start with the introduction. So as we all know, and as we are here today, we know that the pharmacists have a unique and complex body of knowledge and skills and attitude and behavior, that this is mixed with the classwork and curriculum with required training. All of this will make the pharmacist to be on the front line for ensuring individual to receive proper drug and therapeutic treatment for health outcome. Having this being said, in Lebanon, we have faced a set of challenges over the past years, starting with October 17, 2019, which was really a breaking point where we had the start of the financial collapse. This has led to a set of early shortage of oral medication early 2020. And then we moved to have Beirut, we have the coronavirus in February 2020, followed by Beirut explosion on August 4. And there has been a webinar that was organized by FIP on that purpose. Moving further, early 2021, we had COVID-19 shortage of main hospital drugs, and that was followed by a lifting subsidy due to the financial crisis on oral medication, which eventually made them unavailable. So we had also more shortages in hospitals. And finally, in December 2021, we had total lack of funds from the Beirut Central Bank to cover the subsidization of medication. And that really had made most of the medications unavailable. Currently, we are, during those periods between December 2021 until today, things have been worsening and improving depending on medication by medication and medication classes. Currently, tracking system has been implemented by the Ministry of Public Health for highly expensive medications, but things definitely are not totally resolved. In order to have the full picture of things, we need to see as well the Lebanese economy collapse in timeline. So eventually, before the crisis started, the Lebanese pound, which was equivalent to $1 USD, we had 1,500 LBP equivalent to $1 USD. Currently, today, $1 USD equivalent to 93,000 Lebanese pounds. So eventually, we have a decrease in value of local currency by 62 times. And eventually, it reached up to 93 times. Along the same line, the banking system collapsed, country classified as in a restricted default, and this is mainly for foreign currency debt. And along the same line, we moved from being classified by the World Bank from upper middle income country to lower middle income country. Having all of this information in picture, we can definitely tell that we have a crisis. And the crisis etiology is mainly financial crisis, Lebanese currency devaluation, subsidy, and lack of funds. So this will make the medication unavailable. We had during the past period various payment methods, Lebanese local currency. We had all the USD, so the dollar funds available in the banks, and those have been restricted to be utilized as a fresh fund, so only utilized at a certain rate. It's a little bit complicated, but it's a way of devaluating the money inside the bank. And definitely we have the fresh USD, which is what we are currently utilizing in our current days across worldwide economy. Also, we had political and civil unrest. This is early in the crisis. We had road closure as well early in the crisis. Of course, we don't need to add the COVID-19 pandemic and the series of lockdown, August 4 Beirut blast. Definitely, we had an exacerbated economic impact because everything has been impacted from daily living, food supplies, medical devices, everything. Collateral damage series because we didn't have a fuel at a certain point in time. Electricity was only 1 hour per day, and we had to figure out a different way of supplying electricity. delays in shipment and limited quantity by suppliers simply because suppliers were not able even to transfer funds to ship medication to the country due to the total failure of the banking system. And finally, shortages that was really a accumulation of international, local, and financial, and sometimes greed-driven shortage. Having this being said, we need to finalize one item, is that this is only leading to absence of medication. So I'm not able to move the slide. Yes, outcome is unavailability of medication. So the consequences mainly interruption of patient care, increased hospital cost, increased risk of counterfeit medications, increased parallel import, and we all know that parallel import, which is illegal most of the time, they do not preserve neither temperature nor humidity nor storage of the conditioning for the medication, and we increase the risk of having counterfeit medications. And finally, we had lack of quality measures because at a certain point in time when medications are not available, any medication would be used. So no GMP, we have risk of error because we are switching brands, different concentration than the one we are currently or we have been using, different dosage and different dilution. So this definitely will lead to one outcome, which is suboptimal care. Of course, we had measures and mitigation strategies that were done to really overcome the drug shortages and the financial burden. We have been in receipt of donation. We've received support from non-governmental organizations. Definitely the use of dispensaries and outpatient-based therapy has increased. The use of less expensive generics, and sometimes regardless of the quality, and this is across the country, and definitely the use of parallel import to secure self-medication from abroad. So patients were referring to their relatives, anybody they know, to bring them medication that they need for chronic conditions or even for life-threatening conditions. So some of the measures that hospitals in Lebanon were doing, and really I'm selecting, for antifungals, restricting indication, judicious prescribing, and even limiting duration of therapy. Epinephrine at a certain point in time, it was totally not available despite the fact that it is really cheap, but we had to restrict use and we had to compound for syringes in order to avoid loss. Midazolam was mainly used for ICU COVID-19 patients, and mainly because we've received donation and because other agents were not available. Propofol also, it was restricted use to the OR, and we stopped giving it to the ICU patients. And for oncology, we optimized by using milligram per kilogram instead of flat doses. And we are using dose bending strategies in order to make sure we have savings. And ultimately switching protocol per availability and using biosimilar because they are less expensive. So the pharmacist role, definitely there have been several expertise from the pharmacists that really have shown to be of great value, and we know it more than anybody else. Definitely, we've adopted dose bending, compounded extemporaneous preparation, enforcing minimal indication, shortening duration of therapy, optimizing judicious prescribing, switching medication and recommending alternative, and definitely restricting use. Those were put in various contexts, whether drug shortage management, whether antimicrobial stewardship, treatment protocol development, medication expertise, ultimately, and definitely the COVID-19 vaccination and the COVID-19 management. So what is the role of the pharmacist at the end of the day? Ultimately, it is expanded pharmacist role. Definitely all pharmacists, they have been feeling valued. They were taking part in the public health campaign of the century, switching medication in community, being referred to by physicians to make sure to optimize therapy, to recommend alternatives, and taking key role with NGOs and dispensaries. The same boiling water that softened the potato, hardened the eggs. Definitely the pharmacists at a certain point, they are living the crisis, but they have been more and more visible and present. So what are the key takeaways of this discussion? Definitely pharmacy practice is evolving, and one size does not fit all, because what we have been used to as a pharmacy role, doing one dispensing strategy, is no longer valid. Specialty in pharmacy is essential, and we definitely value the role of the specialist, because during the crisis, whether oncology specialists, they were able to optimize and redirect regimen, and definitely in any other specialty, they were able to recommend the right generics to reroute the therapy to. Invest in lifelong learning, skills, and professional development. Definitely those are a must. Each one can make a difference, and persistence of effort, especially in crisis mode, shall yield great result. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Before I end, I also would like to share with you a picture of Beirut before August 4 Beirut blast. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, for this presentation. It's for sure important for colleagues to understand the less mediatic aspects of the crisis. Of course, in the beginning, all the blasts and all these aspects were very mediatic, but the long-term impact of disasters is something that we're considering a lot in our humanitarian work, because it's not only when it happens, it's also, as you explained, in the years following the disaster that there's also implications. And then it was clear in the presentation that the financial aspects are key also for medicine safety. And this is an important aspect. I cannot imagine how a devaluation of 62 times have impact also on all the economy, but of course on the pharmacist's work. And as you said in the end, very crucial aspect is how pharmacists can support teams and optimize medicine use. And for that, we also have in our competency framework all the skills and all the places colleagues can look into where they can develop themselves to be valuable in these teams and in this situation. So Ronnie, thank you so much for the presentation. If colleagues listening to the presentation have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them in the end. So thank you again, Ronnie. And we'll move now to the next presentation. And we have a different perspective. And we have Tasnim Khan, the policy officer of the Pharmacists Defense Association, with the presentation regarding the situation in Ukraine. So Tasnim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. And the presentation so far have been great. I feel like I've already learned a lot. So my name is Tasnim Khan, and today I will be talking to you about managing the risk of antimicrobial resistance from conflict zones, looking specifically at lessons from Ukraine, lessons that we have learned and lessons that we are still learning. So just as a brief overview as to what I'll cover today, I'll give you a quick introduction to the PDA and then to myself. I will provide you with a project outline. I think it's really important to give you some context of how we are where we are today before looking at some findings and lessons. And then I guess there'll be the general question and answer at the end with the panel. So at the PDA, we currently have around 36,000 members across all 4 nations of the United Kingdom and across all the different sectors of pharmacy as well. We also have 4 active equality networks, which you can see the logos of across the top of the slide. And we believe in representing the individual and collective concerns of pharmacists with a focus on well-being and workplace rights. A bit about me. So I am a pharmacist. My background is in hospital pharmacy. I did an MSc in global health and social justice, which led me to become a policy officer for the PDA, where I support pharmacists across the UK in casework. And I also look at policy areas that relate to hospital. And more recently, I say more recently, but it's been more than 6 months now, I've been looking to develop and assist with the international projects such as the Medicines to Ukraine campaign, which I'll talk to you about today. And I was also recently elected as an Assistant General Secretary for the PDA Union. So I mentioned the Medicines to Ukraine campaign, and that's kind of where it all started for us. And it started with Mark Koziol, who is the chairman of the PDA. But this kind of came through his role as the Secretary General of EFU, which is an umbrella organization for employed pharmacists in Europe. So there was a direct call through EFU with the members there, Ukrainian members, that were asking for help with supplies of medicines to their hospitals. So the Medicines to Ukraine campaign was developed to source donations of money rather than medicines, which could then be used to procure specific medicines that were requested through regulated routes. And this was done in collaboration with GbHCF, which is the Polish equivalent of the PDA, and also Polish and Ukrainian authorities. So the campaign was developed in various ways, and one of the ways that donations were encouraged were through posters in pharmacy windows throughout Europe. So once donations kind of started to build, Mark embarked on his journey to deliver the first test consignment of medicines directly to Ukrainian hospitals. And of course, as you can imagine, when he went there, he kind of faced a completely different reality: military vehicles, roadblocks, sandbag doorways, steel anti-tank constructions, barbed wire everywhere. And he has kind of spoken about his journey in detail. If you want, I can link his blog post as well at the end. But he had a really interesting time when he was there. When he visited the hospitals, especially, he saw and he was told about the kind of stacks and stacks of unusable medicines and medical equipment they had. There was near enough expired paracetamol and lots of it. Things like excess ventilators that other countries didn't need for their COVID efforts. And these were all items that essentially increased the burden on the hospitals and the clinicians to store and eventually dispose of, because they couldn't make use of them. And that's where the merit of using a pull model as opposed to a push model was really identified. So it became quite clear that donations and efforts would be more meaningful if clinicians could request what they needed, and that for that to be fulfilled, rather than countries kind of giving what they no longer needed. And in the process of establishing this model and having that communication with the clinicians, Mark was able to build that relationship of trust. And he kind of always says him being a pharmacist made it more relatable. And he also describes seeing a physical shift in their body language. He describes, their arms opening up and things as they started to talk about some of the other issues that they faced in hospital. And one of the issues that they spoke a lot about was antimicrobial resistance. So that's how that initial Medicines to Ukraine campaign developed into looking at AMR. And sometimes they say right place, right time. You could say wrong place, wrong time. But either way, the calls for help, they initially came from that local hospital clinician level. And then with time, that went up to a ministerial level as well. But kind of going back to Mark coming back from Ukraine, when he was back, there were articles published in the UK about his journey and about the clinicians raising AMR as a serious cause for concern. And it was as a result of that colleagues at the British Society of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy picked up on this, and that's where we decided to partner up in this desire to tackle AMR issues in Ukraine. We all recognise the seriousness of this and how this was a truly global issue, because as we all know, resistant bugs know no borders, and we decided it would be vital to do some proper fact finding to understand the situation before launching into solutions. As you can imagine, as healthcare professionals, it can be quite hard to not go straight into solutions and not try to fix things straight away. But we did collectively decide that we needed to embark on proper fact finding to scope the landscape before we started mapping out any strategies. So I think there's a bit of a delay in moving my slides. So that's how we came to organising a fact-finding meeting in Lublin, Poland, where we took relevant experts from the UK, and we also invited key players from Ukraine to discuss the matters at greater length. So from our UK delegates, we had individuals from the British military, the Department of Health, we had AMR specialist pharmacists, infection prevention specialists, microbiologists, etc. And it was really important to have the correct group of multidisciplinary experts to attend this meeting, because we think and we still think that was potentially the only meeting that we'll be able to have face-to-face with the Ukrainian delegates. They had really strict rules on their movement, and it was difficult just for that meeting to obtain approval for their travel. Most of the men in the group had to be turned away at the border. They weren't allowed across, so we knew we had to make the most of that opportunity. The format of the 2 days that we had there were roundtable discussions. We were focusing on 4 different groups. So we were looking at ministry officials, frontline responders, hospitals where their infrastructure had been largely impacted by the war, and hospitals where their infrastructure had largely remained the same regardless of the war. And we did have an agenda where we wanted to address specific issues, and we used that to kind of steer this discussion in the initial stages, but we went in with a very open mind, and we wanted to keep the agenda open-ended and flexible so that the discussion could flow naturally. And we really encouraged and called on the experts to ask the right questions based on the information and the answers that they were receiving. And that turned out to be the most productive way to host that session. In terms of findings and lessons, we had an incredibly informative and productive couple of days where we quickly learned that there was a lot to unpick in general, but a lot to unpick about the Ukrainian healthcare system itself. So that's in regards to things like the microbiology labs state, how information is shared there, and how the roles of different professions vary in comparison to UK standards. So there are differences in definitions and job descriptions. We also learned that there was a great need or great scope, I guess, for support in terms of education and training. And the Ukrainians were keen for us to support them with this as well. We were looking for opportunities to provide mentorship and also improving knowledge of good antimicrobial stewardship on a large scale. We still are in the process of actually analysing all this information and these findings. I sometimes forget that the conference only happened a couple of weeks ago. And we've kind of looked at the information from that conference, but we've also provided the Ukrainian delegates and the UK delegates with questionnaires to find out what people's thoughts are, I guess, post event, what people think are the key areas to prioritize, and then kind of seeing what individuals and what groups prioritize what, so then we can see where there are overlaps, where there are differences, and then it will just help us to strategize and really streamline all the work streams, because the things that I've mentioned are really just a drop in the bucket. There's so much and so much that can be done, but we just want to make sure that we're doing justice by the project and making sure that we're keeping everything organized and keeping everything on track as well. So as I mentioned, we are still in the early stages, pull out some general lessons. So it's very important to fact find first, engage in that listening mode, try and avoid jumping straight into solutions. When you are looking at solutions, look at things that will help both in the short and the long term. It can be, again, really easy to provide quick fixes, but where there are systematic issues, you want to provide them with things that are sustainable and that will actually make a difference and benefit them in the long run. There's also a delicate balance of not automatically assuming that the UK has the gold standard. There are cultural differences that are really important to be mindful of. So one of them is, for example, in the UK, we've come a long way from medical doctors being the sole decision makers and being the nucleus of the healthcare team. In the UK, we work more in a multidisciplinary team setting where different healthcare professionals are empowered to do different things. But in Ukraine, they still have a very traditional hierarchy. So it's important to bear that dynamic in mind, because to address something like that will take a long time. So we kind of have to work with it rather than against it. And finally, there's always room to learn. There's even for us in the UK, I'm sure everyone will agree, there's plenty of room for improvement here. And again, one of the issues the Ukrainians highlighted was they were still having to use a predominantly paper-based system with a lack of communication between different parts of the healthcare system. And that's still an issue that we face here. So there are certain things we can advise on, but we won't necessarily have all the answers. And again, it's really important to be aware of our limitations. But in essence, it's about providing our colleagues in Ukraine with the means to work things out for themselves according to their own needs. Overall, there is still a lot of work to be done. The project has grown well beyond our initial vision. We are grateful to be in a position to help. We just want to make sure that we get this right. So we are continuing to call on the right experts and collaborate with the right people to start making some real change. And I think that's one thing that I would stress as well, making sure you have the right experts around the table, because if you don't have the right people with the right knowledge, you're doing a disservice to the country that you are trying to help. And as I mentioned earlier, AMR issues are global and they should be of concern to everyone. And it's really important as pharmacists that we have an awareness of what's going on. Knowledge is power, and at the very least we need to know that this is happening, and then we can look at how we can help to reduce it in our day-to-day work, and that will depend on the different sectors that you are in, but there is a lot that we can do in our day-to-day. So thank you very much for listening, and that's everything from me.
Thank you so much, Tasnim, for this presentation about this project. Quite interesting to see also the collaboration. How can different countries support other countries that are going through some difficulties or some situations? Some aspects that we're also talking in our humanitarian discussions, as you said, the types of donations. So who knows better what is needed in the country, because otherwise you just try to help and you end up not helping at all or making it worse. So usually, of course, money is one of the easiest donations, but then if the pharmacists are there and they have control over the supply and the logistics, of course, they are probably the most indicated person to understand what is needed and what type of donations could be could be more relevant, more important. Also, the issue of the AMR, of course, that AMR is already dangerous in the normal situations. And then if you go for a disaster place or a country that is in conflict, of course, these issues can spread faster and we can have worse outcomes very quickly. So the AMR situation is also very timely and important point to understand that it could be even worse in these type of situations. And last point that I noted is about the cultural differences and also perhaps even the training differences, because if you go to a place and they do a certain type of procedure that you didn't have any training or you don't relate at all, maybe you need to learn there, as you said, not go against it, but you might need to adapt to all the structural differences, all the hierarchies, as you said, but even maybe new ways of logistics or new ways of doing clinical testing. So it's really a game or a situation that you need to adapt and to understand what is the new reality or the new way to do things there. So it was very interesting. Thank you so much. Again, the colleagues that are listening, if you have any questions, you want to know more, maybe you can also share the blog post you said in the group chat so people can also go and read a bit more about it. Again, thank you so much for this presentation. And now we'll move on to the next presentation. And we have our dearest colleague, Ali Burak Salman, is the FIP Membership Marketing Coordinator, and he'll guide us through the situation that happened in Turkey recently with the earthquake, but also how it has been evolving and how this situation impacted the pharmacy in the country. So Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rúben. And I would also like to thank all of the presentations before me. They've been marvelous so far, and I've learned quite a lot. Although I thought that I knew quite a few things about that, things that you learn actually amazes you every single time. So my name is Ali. I am from Turkey. I've been working for FIP for 3 years, and I would like to share some experience that we had during the last 3 months, which has been hard on Turkish people and Syrian people, and also to the world. I will start with my presentation with what has been going on in Turkey and what could have been avoided, and then I will move on to the part where pharmacists went into the action and what they did. So I will start with a little brief information. On 6 February 2023, Turkey was shaken by 2 major earthquakes in a city called Kahramanmaraş, and that morning was a milestone for everybody in Turkey and also in Syria, because we all woke up with great sadness in our hearts, whether we were in the earthquake zone or not. Nobody thought about the closest relatives, but we thought about everyone, like what happened, what can be done. And the earthquake was centered in Kahramanmaraş, but it affected a total of 10 cities in Turkey, including Hatay, Kilis, Gaziantep, Osmaniye, Şanlıurfa, Adıyaman, Diyarbakır, Malatya, and Adana. I would like to mention their names so that people will never forget, because being forgotten is one of the worst things that we can do to these victims. And at that point, we started thinking, couldn't we have lessened the damage of these earthquakes? The answer is actually very simple. Because in 2011, Turkey had something similar. It was close to Istanbul, and the damage was incredible once again. And we actually took some precautions, and we started giving education to people, the children in schools. I was one of those children, and we actually got the education in primary school about what to do in an earthquake, since we were an earthquake country, because Turkey is a country that is frequently exposed to earthquakes due to active tectonic fault lines in Earth's crust. There are other such countries as well, of course. The first country that comes in mind is Japan, and the magnitude and the frequency of those earthquakes are much more than it happens in Turkey, but they're really well prepared compared to us. And this comes with education that has been beginning before, and also many more precautions that they take. These are some things that we actually didn't do also in 2011 and 2023 in February. So if I need to talk about the reasons why the damage was really bigger in Turkey, is simply because the first thing I would start with is structural deficiencies. Many buildings in Turkey are not built in accordance with earthquake codes in 2019. When the local elections were held, there were 10.25 million applications for the reconstruction piece, which was made as an election propaganda, like in many countries, I would say. But considering that all households are 24 million in Turkey, it is understood that there were a problem in almost half of the households in Turkey. And these buildings could suffer the most damage in the earthquakes. And nobody took any actions regarding to that. I think that was the biggest problem, like closing our ears to the warning that we had in 2011. And another reason at this point would be the dense population. Turkey is a country that its population is concentrated in big cities. According to our statistical constituency, the results of the population living in the cities and the districts is 93%. And only the 7% are living in the villages. Therefore, the impact of earthquakes is felt more on human life and economy. And the constructions are also a big problem because numerous urban transformation projects in Turkey did not address the real buildings that needed to be converted and led to a rent-based economy, which ended up in a big problem. And also, natural disasters are something we need to consider. Turkey is a country exposed to natural disaster risks such as fault lines and volcanic activity, and therefore other disasters such as volcanic eruptions and floods. These can also damage besides the earthquakes. In order to increase earthquake safety, the country's earthquake codes should be updated. This is very important, and I know some of the listeners are living in a similar structure. Therefore, these things need to be fixed, even though you are not in actual danger right now. Potential danger doesn't mean that there is no danger. It is actually right there. Therefore, you should be careful. And I believe one of the most important things before I start telling you what the pharmacist should do is the coordination. Coordination. This is very important. You need to be coordinated with every single unity that has been there to help you out. What happened as the first reaction is people started to think about what they should do. And like every single people, me and my wife, we are both pharmacists. So we started to send out some medicine, some drugs to those regions. But suddenly we realized that there is a huge accumulation of medicines. Some of them are unnecessary, and we were just distributing everything without any knowledge or without any directions. We've been sending out some clothes and everything, but the first thing that didn't came to our minds was there were no drinkable water in those regions, and none of us actually thought about it. So coordination and listening from the experts about these things are the most important thing. So you may want to act really fast in these situations, but it is also good to take a deep breath, wait for a while, and then do the action. This is exactly what TPA, which I am a proud member of for several years, did. They just gathered around, all the pharmacy leaders, the pharmacists gathered around in the TPA building, and they decided that, okay, as the TPA, we need to do something and we need to take some actions. What should we do? Because after the first analysis, we figured out that the 44 pharmacists and the 21 pharmacy students lost their lives in the earthquake. Over 500 pharmacies were completely demolished or severely damaged, and around 150 moderately damaged hospitals will be demolished by the government's decision due to the security reasons. The Turkish Pharmacists Association immediately declared a mobilization with all pharmacists in Turkey and started to share the news among all of us. And they asked for help, and they told us that it is time to get united. 328 field pharmacies established in the earthquake zone by TPA. Voluntary pharmacists delivered medicines, medical products, and hygiene kits to earthquake victims continuously 24/7 and completely free of charge, of course. This has been done by the leadership of Turkish Pharmacy Association's president, Mr. Arman Üney, and his team. It was a really quick action, and I'm proud to say that there were only a few unities that actually made it as effective as Turkish Pharmacists Association. So I'm really proud to be a member. And over 3,500 pharmacists served in those field pharmacies that I mentioned in my previous slide. On a rotation basis, everybody was getting their call for help, and we were just going to those locations, trying to provide medicine to those who were in need, because some people actually had their medicines buried in the wreckages, and they were not able to get their medication, both financially and also it was not allowed to them by the Security Health Services. So we were trying to cover for that. This is the best that we can do as all pharmacists here. Medicine is our strongest side. And these medicines and medical products and hygiene kits delivered in field pharmacies were also provided through donations made by pharmacists to the country-level donation campaigns. The Turkish Pharmacists Association established a 250 people capacity temporary shelter center for pharmacists, pharmacy students, and their families who lost their homes and were forced to move out. And the TPA still hosts its colleagues in this center, which is based in Ankara. In addition to those, clothing, food, heaters, and hygiene materials were delivered to the earthquake regions for victims through the Turkish Pharmacists Association on means and support from pharmacists. And in conjunction with those, the Turkish pharmacists used every means available in order to heal our colleagues' wounds, to contribute them economically, and also to restore their pharmacies. A disaster support of 250,000 Turkish liras was provided to pharmacists whose pharmacies were destroyed, and these money was collected by the donations of pharmacists around Turkey. And this number increased up to a total of 150 million Turkish liras that would be given to the pharmacists who suffered during the earthquake. And scholarship opportunities were provided to the children of deceased pharmacists throughout their education. This was the actions that TPA took right at that moment, and they still try to develop on what can be done, because this is still an ongoing process. That's why I will not be able to share more legit data about these things, because things are still going on. It is really fresh at the moment. And we actually delivered a good response to the acute problem, but right now we are in the middle of the chronic problem, where there are still some areas in Turkey that the teams were not able to enter yet because of the wreckages. And this will go at least for a couple of years. So it was great to listen to all of the presentations before and share the experience that we have with you. And teşekkürler means thank you in Turkish for listening to me. And I would like to apologize if I made any of you sad or. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And I would like to thank my field colleagues for giving me a platform to talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. it's for sure an emotive presentation, but it's normal because all these disaster situations bring some emotions and bring some situations that are part of those situations. So we stand with all the colleagues in all these situations, and as FIP we try to coordinate and send the best as we can, a big hug and big support to them. So regarding your presentation, I think important aspects are the preparedness ones, because again, as I said in the beginning, there will be for sure more disasters, more situations. So the preparedness, being ready for when they happen, it's one of the important points. And as you said, starting with children in school, like you had, and also countries that are more likely to have these situations should, of course, prioritize those. Also, that as you said, that some of these decisions are also a bit political most of the time. So it's also important that pharmacists occupy their spaces also in the policy world, in politics, get involved, because they can also then have a voice and contribute to health policies and to all these policies that are important in these areas. And lastly, it's the work of the national associations, or in other places, maybe local associations. It's important. And as you're a prod member, so you probably have listening other prod members of other associations that can engage and can be part of the solution. So I think it's a good call to action for all the colleagues to be involved and liaise with all the associations and all the organizations that can provide support. So thank you so much, Ali. It was very interesting presentation. And as you said, I'm learning from all the presentations, because sometimes you think you know about the situations, but then you hear from someone that was in the field, and you understand that there's more to it. So thank you so much again for your presentation. And we'll have another presentation. And this presentation is from Prosper Yag. He's the Vice President of FIP and also the President of the African Pharmaceutical Forum. He'll bring us some perspectives from the African region, Sudan, Malawi, Mozambique. So we'll have his insights also on these situations. So Monsieur Prosper Yag, à vous. Merci.
The situation in Africa is
Prosper?
yes.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you for like the last minute. May you please let us know if, yeah, now you're connected. Now we can see that you're on.
It's okay now?
Yeah, it's okay now. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for giving me the floor here to talk about what happened in Africa all the recent days, the recent months. We had the situation of the cyclone in East Africa, Malawi, Mozambique, and situation of disaster of war in Sudan. The first slide, please. In Sudan, we had more than 500 deaths. People died, and more than 2.5 thousand injured since the clash began in May. This situation has created a number of refugees growing in neighbor countries, and this transfer of refugees has created a catastrophe situation, very disaster. But the next slide. What was the situation in Sudan? More than 70 hospitals and pharmacies near the conflict areas were out of service. Out of 80 basic hospitals in the capital of the state, only 60 were suspended. Others fully and partially functioning. All hospitals, health facilities, and pharmacies now are still in service in city of El Genelia, the violence zone, after being attacked and robbed. The microbiology laboratory in Khartoum was attacked by fighters. A huge biologic risk: measles, polio, cholera, and tuberculosis. Race against time as the rainy season approaches. The rainy season, which is something growing in many countries now because of the climate change. So some of cold chain equipment were destroyed. Medical stocks are extremely low and in conflict areas now. And one of the most important consequences is that with such shortages of all medical and surgical supply, including oxygen and blood bag, this has been one of the way of acts of donors, of volunteers. WHO estimate that half of vaccines were lost in this country. Next slide. In East Africa, displays created by Cyclone Freddy, more than 500,000 people have been displaced and at least 500 kills. Floods and strong winds have led to the destruction of livelihoods and infrastructure across many districts of Malawi and Mozambique. Next slide. Tropical cyclone Freddy has put millions of children in Malawi and Mozambique at risk of a potential increase in cholera cases. When you see the picture, this has increased the vulnerability of children and families in both countries, with where already struggling with inadequate water, no drinkable water, hygiene, health, and sanitation system. Next slide. Immediate action to take is to support local pharmacy. But what we have realized is that there is more and more solidarity between pharmacists and more pharmacists involved in public health. Donation of medicines and consumables. I've seen in many countries, pharmacy donating medicines, voluntary, organizing themselves through the pharmaceutical associations, like in Turkey. Cold chain by renewable energy. It is important also, but using solar energy for the cold chain. Medical equipment for the first aid should be available also. Food and essential supplies should be there. What I think is that we need more solidarity. We need more communication between our organizations when a disaster arrives, when a disaster happens, more collaboration. The framework of FIP should be a kind of Bible, Bible for us. We should read and think about that. Competence development should be also systematic to know more about public health, about what can be done in this kind of situation. I would like to thank you for listening me, for inviting me in this webinar, for inviting Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prosper, for this presentation, and thank you, everyone. Prosper, we can't say except that we're at FIP, and as you know, inclusive. So it's really no need to thank for including Africa or the Middle East or any other regions. We are here gathered and we're looking at all the regions. Whenever we look around ourselves, we see that the crises are being frequently encountered. We're getting more and more crises around the world, being man-made, nature-made, or pandemics. We totally understand what's happening, and we appreciate the way you reflected on the situation and you presented what is happening. We have all to be in solidarity, work together to learn from each other for all these experiences. We've got wonderful questions on the Q&A box, and I wish that everyone on this webinar could have looked at those and looked at the questions. We had questions related to quality of medicines and other questions related to some other aspects or some aspects of pharmacy that are important in in daily life, but are more and more important whenever we have crises. Talking about preparedness in different topics. So I would like to ask all the speakers to have their camera on and to be on the, thank you, Rúben, to be on the screen in order to ask them some questions. Rúben, let me start by you, and we had let me say a question about the quality of medications. I will do all of them in one question, then switching to other medications. And then we had an intervention from our colleague, Warren Nick. Just let me tell you that Warren is an FIP member, has been involved in many positions within FIP, and Warren is highly involved in humanitarian work. So he's been touring the world, working in a humanitarian fashion. So he said about it's a shame to say that in a country, the pharmacist is not being able to switch, or it's not accepted to switch from one medication and the other. We're living in the same country. We know how the practices are different, but what you want, and the laws are different, but what you want to add on this point.
Thank you so much, Marwan, for the opportunity, and thank you for all the valuable questions that have been put in the Q&A chat box. Eventually, let me try to put them as well in a lump sum answer. It has been really tough times to see that sometimes we see patients who really need their medications, and their medications are simply not available. And it has been really a crisis, and kind of in a way we've tried our best to secure any potential availability, whether by compounding, whether by switching, whether by any opportunity to make sure that the patient will receive their medications. We've even used, eventually we've used adrenaline that is eventually was sent for the vaccination campaign, potential allergic reaction, in order to secure what we really need in the critical care. It was really tough in terms of times to make sure we secure our operations. However, regarding the quality of the medication, definitely at any point in time, everybody would be thankful to receive donation. But as we all know, and as it has been asked by John, sometimes the quality is not ultimate nor optimal, and sometimes we doubt whether it might have some efficacy or not. And it was left to the institution to be able to use it, whether they have other alternative or they are not able to find any other to secure the need. But as the crisis has moved on and more time elapsed, all organizations have been soliciting the recipient whether they need this medication, because we really don't need to receive an excess of a certain meds and it would be expired and thrown away. So having the solicitation of the need, that would definitely provide the opportunity to select the quality, to select the quantity, to select the needed item, rather than receiving from everyone the same quantity of the same medication. So as for switching generics, the pharmacist can switch generics, but sometimes when we are switching to a different class of medication, that definitely would require physician's approval to make sure we have equivalent or the patient's ultimate clinical outcome would be met. And we've reached a stage where we really didn't have neither the molecule nor any molecule of its class. So the patient had to change total therapy and total class, even combination or even suboptimal regimen. I'm not sure whether I answered all the questions, but let me know if there is anything else I can add.
Definitely, thank you, thank you. I would like to go to Prosper. And Prosper, we had a question addressed to you after your presentation asking about any security issues related to the storage and delivery of the medication during the crisis in Africa.
Security issues.
Yeah, for the medications.
For medication, when you have a crisis, you will have drugs from all over the world coming everywhere. But the main problem is to choose the best one, the best drugs that are convenient for the people who are facing a crisis situation. So you need first to do the selection of good medicines. But that is where I'm talking about collaboration between people. Donation are not sometimes corresponding to the needs of the people in the countries. This has to be organized by pharmacists who know well the drugs, who have the knowledge of the medicines. This is important. More and more now in emergencies, in humanitarian action, you have more pharmacists, mainly young pharmacists who are trained in public health. They can assure the safety and the security of the drugs that are coming in the country. They can control with mini labs, which are small equipment that can avoid fake drugs and so on. And that I think
Prosper is having an internet issue, a connection issue. So until we're getting him back, we'll be going to Tasneem to ask you a question about the cultural differences. And how, as pharmacists, we need to address this when we are helping or doing our humanitarian work, be it in a different country or a different region.
So I think I touched on this in the presentation regarding the hierarchy. That's something that's really important to be aware of, because the dynamic between the different healthcare professionals is very different to what we experience in the UK. With Ukraine in particular, one thing that we found was actually what they call a pharmacist is very different to what we call a pharmacist, and they have pharmacists and then clinical pharmacists. and they do completely different degrees, completely different training pathways, and the jobs that they can undertake are also very different. So in terms of cultural differences, they have that different education and training setup as well. And again, it's kind of, we've come a long way in the UK where pharmacists can be quite empowered and respected, but actually in other countries that might not necessarily be the case. I think when we were speaking to the Ukrainian delegates, they were saying how there aren't that many clinical pharmacists, but the ones that are there, they're valuable, but they're not valued. And that's the problem as well. They can provide this insight, but if they're not respected or given that space, then that's also a problem. So I guess in terms of cultural differences, it's kind of being aware of the dynamics and how they play out.
Thank you, Tasneem. And just for the Ukrainian situation, just allow me to highlight that we've been approached at the beginning of the crisis by Ukrainian colleagues asking us to help them provide a list for especially the workforce. So we have provided this list, and this was really helpful for our pharmacists moving across the borders in order, especially also for pharmacy students, so that they can continue the learning process, or they can we've even like worked on some tables of equivalence for medications that are present in Ukraine and what is an equivalent to it in different countries. So what you just mentioned was really important, because this is different. We have different systems. It's not only about the culture, it's also sometimes about the training and education. Thank you, Tasneem. Ali? So, we've been talking about the direct response and the work that has been done after the crisis, after the earthquakes. But we're always talking about the short term and the long term. So we shouldn't forget that we have to keep on looking at what's happening and how we can help as pharmacists. So we know what has been done on the short term. What about the long term? What are the plans?
I can talk. Thank you for the question, by the way, Marwan. What I can say right now is that as I said, the acute reaction has already been completed. We try to cover the wounds, the small ones, but there are now some long-term actions that we need to take. 500 pharmacists are suffering from the big losses in their lives. The pharmacies are lost. Some of them actually lost their relatives. Of course, there's nothing we can do about this, but only psychological support. This is also very important, to be reached out. This is one thing that I experienced during this time with our beloved CEO, Catherine Duggan, who is also here, and I would like to thank her also at this moment, because she was reaching out to us every single day, and it actually meant a lot to all of us, because being remembered is one of the most important things. And if you are in a good state of mind, then you can accomplish everything. At this term, when we look at it, a new system needs to be built up, and this needs to be built up on the new data that we're receiving, because as I answered some of the questions, things are changing in those countries, in those cities of the earthquake zones. Some people are migrating, the populations are changing, the needs are changing by the time goes. But right now, there's a steady medicine service going on in those cities. And what TPA is trying to do right now is to provide a way to keep on living to those pharmacists, and also to keep them remain in those regions with a more stable life standard. Right now, these are the actions that we're trying to take, and hopefully it seems like a good plan so far, but I think the time will show in the future.
I would like to take the opportunity to talk about technology, knowing that most of us on the call had some internet issues during this call. So let's take it bigger to the technology. We had a question that was answered in the Q&A, but would like to listen and to know others what they think about how we can use technology in humanitarian settings, or to help us have a good humanitarian response. All of you are welcome to answer. Just let us know who wants to go first. Fascinating.
Oh, sorry, was that me? So we've actually had issues with technology because initially when we started this project, we tried to do online meetings and they didn't work because obviously Ukrainians are having issues with electricity as well. So that's why we had to push for the in-person meeting. So it's kind of like you try and be technological and then you have to take it back to back to old-fashioned ways. But there are definitely things that technology can help with. I think if we can look at the systems, address some of the system issues, for example, the having a system to report outbreaks, report infections, report the antibiotics that are being used, those types of things technology will really help with. I guess within Ukraine, their communications, if that can become more technological as well, I think that would really help, because again, the paper-based systems, things are just being lost. One of the issues that we saw as well with military patients were that they were going into hospitals, they were overcrowding the hospitals, and they were kind of being moved on without any trail or anything of where they're going or what they've had or what treatment they've had. So I guess if we could add some technology there, that would be really useful for that as well.
Thank you, Tasneem. Catherine, you had your microphone on. Yeah. We can't hear you, Catherine. We'll go to Moni or Prosper.
Well, I can go.
Go ahead.
Regarding technology, definitely the use of donation can be optimized with health information technology for inventory, for allocation, for follow-up, for transparency, for allocation, for various reasons. But also we have to question the fact that, do we have the infrastructure to have the technology running all the time? In our situation, we had interruption in the power, interruption in several various approaches. Most of the Lebanese are moving now to solar power because we don't have enough electricity all the time. We had even 0 hour per 24 hours from central electricity, but then things are moving to a better situation. However, when we're talking about dispensaries, NGOs, do they have the setup for information technology system? And this is a question that we really have to operate with. Ultimately, yes, it helps and it reflects great because we will be able to know to whom the drug is going, and with ultimate transparency, we make sure that the drug is well utilized. But the question of the infrastructure interruption, this is the main challenge and hurdle. I hope I answered this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I would like to just, Catherine is again with us. Let's try the mic.
Hi, Marwan, can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect, great.
Oh.
Isn't that hilarious that I'm talking about technology and even my technology failed me. So Tasneem mentioned about digital communications and how reliant we are on them. And then it's reminded me, Prosper, how even last year, we undertook to support many African nations in simply establishing electricity in countries. So it shows you that actually technology which is reliant on electricity can be totally not have good electric systems. And Marwan, I know from your personal experience being in Lebanon, power shortages and power outages have impacted communication so much. So we do have to revert to some old-fashioned ways, traditional ways, but also look at the big picture here. And I think that's really, really important. And if you don't have electricity in your country, then how do you keep your medicines at good temperatures and in good situations? Only the pharmacists really, really think about these things. So it's a very, very complex system when you have natural disasters, and then when you have ongoing man-made crises, or you have a mixture like we saw in Lebanon, which was all the economics and then the blast on top of the pandemic. And I'll do some more of this layered impact, Marwan, when we come to my closing remarks. But I just wanted to mention in some countries, it's even more fundamental than not having Wi-Fi. It's not having any power that is the big issue. Yeah, thank you. The irony is not lost on me that I lost my own power at that moment.
Thank you, Sidi. Yeah, the thing is, we're all back. So with solidarity. So the others will continue when someone is out of the meeting. My last question, before Rúben, any other questions are coming to us from your side? Thank you. So my last question, maybe it won't be a question as thinking about a topic for our new webinar, but maybe having your insights, Sidi, Rúben, Nour, this and Ali, this got to me right now. We're talking about ethics in humanitarian settings. So above thinking about all the medical, clinical, pharmaceutical knowledge that we have and having the right choice for the right patients, comes all the ethical issues with our decision. Just your comments on these. Prosper? You can't hear us. So I was asking about the issue of ethics and ethical dilemmas when dealing with humanitarian issues. Okay. We'll go to Rúben.
Well, eventually we've been making sure that if I'm going to talk ethics, definitely it is a great element that we have to keep in mind, of course, anytime. And I'm going to start, as I alluded before, I'm going to start by allocating the donation to real patients. This is where I start, and making sure that transparently are being donated accordingly. 1, 2, making sure that when we are switching patients, we are switching patients with value, switching options, because sometimes, and what is happening, the ethics is sometimes very hard to select to which medication you're gonna move the patient to, because neither option would be ultimate. And sometimes going transparently with the patient and telling them the available option compared to their value and the efficacy, especially when we're talking about cancer therapy. And this is what happened many times and still happening in Lebanon. This is ethics. This is what we really need to look into, and what we have to discuss over and over again, because if we unfortunately, I would say, if we compare the mortality rate in Lebanon for oncology patients before the crisis and we compare it to current mortality rate, I'm sure we don't have currently any estimate, nor we have any percentages of mortality, but I'm sure it's increasing. And this is very unfortunate to hear, because we don't have essential elements, because we don't have essential medications. This is what I have to say.
That's absolutely, yeah, thank you. Tasneem, how are you dealing with ethical dilemmas while dealing with like humanitarian work?
So I can obviously give a view as someone from the outside going into the situation, and I think ethics are very important, being an outsider. For me, for example, I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not an AMR expert, so I wouldn't pretend to go into a country where they're having AMR problems and say, because I'm from the UK, I have this knowledge. That wouldn't be ethical. But making sure you have the right experts around the table that can give that knowledge. And it's, as I mentioned earlier as well, you'd be doing a disservice to the country. So for me, I think that's where the ethics come in, looking at your intentions, looking at the way that you're conducting your work, again, having that awareness of what the cultural differences are. Those kind of things, for me, play a part of the ethics in my situation.
Thank you, Tasneem. Prosper, you have your hand raised. May you please unmute your microphone? Prosper, may you please unmute your microphone? Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, ethics is important. Imagine that it is in this kind of situation that we will find more fake, more falsified medicines.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we have to avoid. And what can make us avoid that? Fundamentally, it's ethics. Having ethics in our mind every time, from donors, from receivers. And in this kind of situation also, people are taking advantage to do their business, and this is something which can be also avoided by encouraging and promoting ethics. This is my position.
Thank you. Thank you. Being aware of the time and looking at the amount of interaction we're having, be it from the reactions of the sent by our audience or the questions, this may be a non-ending event. However, we're restricted by the time. Allow me now to give the floor for the final words for our CEO, Catherine Duggan, who is working hard in advocating for the role of the pharmacists in the community. So, Arina.
Well, thank you so much, Marwan, for those lovely words, and particularly to Ali as well for your words as well. I'm truly humbled, actually, with an event like this today. And I must just pay testament to my team at FIP, many of whom live in countries that are going through crises, have been going through crises for many, many years, are going through crises that FIP is supporting them with, and maybe are in countries where FIP has yet to support as it should. But particular thanks today to Ronnie, to Ali, to Tasnim and Prosper. I feel that your stories and your advice to us are very well made. I wanted to just pull together some of these issues for colleagues on the call who may not know Marwan and Rúben and Nour of our intention to support during such crises. So you'll remember back in 2018, I'm nearly at my 5-year anniversary at FIP, but we signed up the profession to the Astana Declaration, which is to achieve universal health coverage through primary healthcare with the mantra of leaving nobody behind. In 2019, we saw the publication of 10 global threats. And if I just mention 3 of them, weak primary care, then it was described as a flu pandemic, and fragile communities as being 3 of the major ones. Well, if we don't take account of these threats and look at what's happening in our countries, then FIP could be accused of leaving people behind. But this is our mantra, we leave nobody behind. So since 2020, the pandemic has really shown us that the profession steps up and steps into a crisis. But what it also showed us was there are inequities between our countries. There are inequities in our countries between ages, ethnicities, economic situations, and inequities in terms of access to care and shortages, etc. But where we see countries that have 2 or more of the global threats added on, they're not just additive, Marwan, they are multiplying. We see some countries that have a weak primary care system in the middle of a pandemic, with fragile communities either going through trauma and crisis already economically, and then another disaster befalls them, whether that is the blast in Lebanon, whether Prosper, that is conflict or earthquakes, whether Ali, that's another earthquake in Turkey, or whether it's a war. And Ronnie as well, in Lebanon, you described to us so clearly that it is a multiplication of factors that brings us into the crisis that we're feeling. I think this is where FIP has understood that we can help in an emergency. We've been very good at this. Our military and emergency pharmacy section has been doing this for years. But what's really needed with the FIP family is a human approach, a humanitarian program, and a human understanding. To be humble in a moment, to understand that different countries have different needs. Different countries may need different levels of care and attention. Different countries may not have a member organisation for the pharmacists on the ground there. Maybe there's countries that have a pharmacist organisation, but they're busy getting on with the crisis at hand. And also, as Ali mentioned, the things that you need in day 1 are different to the things that you may need in day 100. So to forget is the worst thing that FIP can do. So in that way, we are really pleased. We're not pleased with the reasons we had to, but we're pleased that we made humanitarian a big priority programme for 2023 and 2024. Little did we know that all the learnings through 2023 and beyond before that helped us in the response to the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and very different approaches have to be taken with both those countries. And little did we know, Prosper, that we would not only see Storm Freddy, but then we will see the crisis in Sudan that is with us today as well. And little did we know that those crises may be in our newspapers today and tomorrow, but there will be more. and with climate change, there will be even more. So this means it's really important for FIP to take this seriously. Today, you have heard from the people that really matter, the people in those countries, the people who understand, and the people who have been supported and who do the supporting. But please know, colleagues, that we are here to do that supporting on a long-term basis. And this is the first event of many of its type. We will be hosting some face-to-face opportunities in Brisbane, but we also know that this digital format, technology difficulties notwithstanding, is some of the best to reach us out together. And I really thank all of our colleagues here today who've taken the time to tell their stories, and all the colleagues who have stayed with us throughout this event. Particular thanks, though, to Team FIP, to Marwan, Rúben, Nour and Ali for your hard work on this programme, doing it over and above your original job descriptions, but doing it for the right reasons. I'm really thankful. And thanks to the other participants as well. Thank you, Marwan. That's my closing remarks, that we are here and we will do what is needed country by country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sidi, for those words. And as you said, we're continuing, we're keeping up the work, hoping that we won't have other crises, but unfortunately, crises will keep on coming. Yeah,
I forgot the most important, sorry, Marwan. In the words of our president, he always has used the word since he took up his presidency: trust, solidarity and action. Marwan, you said solidarity earlier on, but it is only through trust that we can stand shoulder to shoulder with our colleagues. Isn't that right, Marwan? And then we can take the action that they need us to take. So we are here for you, colleagues, and we will always stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Thank you, Marwan. Sorry, I forgot my important words.
Definitely. Thank you, Sidi, for all your words, and thank you everyone for being here. I will leave the floor now to Nour for Nour. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marwan, and thank you, Sidi, for these final remarks. I would like to mention that with the FIP 81st World Congress of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences happening in Brisbane, Australia on the 24th to the 28th of September, we'd like to call you to register. There's the early bird registration deadline on the 15th of June. The abstract submission deadline has already passed, but we really hope to have you there with us in September in Australia. Next slide. We'd also like to take this opportunity to stress the importance of what our colleagues in the Pharmacy Education Journal are doing these times. It's a fully open access peer-reviewed journal that has been serving the domain of pharmacy and education, workforce development, and associated fields for over 20 years. The journal specifically supports and encourages early career academics, scientists, and practitioners to publish work with a no-cost route to dissemination, particularly where scientific English is not a first language. I'd like to thank you all for attending this webinar, and thank you to all our expert panelists for sharing their knowledge, their expertise, their stories. We really look forward to having you all with us in our upcoming webinars, and thank you very much. Thank you, Marwan. Thank you, Rúben. Thanks, Sidi.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a million. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, world.